Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the NFL wire site for the USA Today sports media group, the family of USA Today sites. My co-host, as always, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. Both of us cover the Arizona Cardinals. Both of us have grown up here, are fans of the team, and have covered the team as credentialed media for quite some time. So we get the insider and outside perspectives. Seth, it's episode 258, and we've got some news. DJ Humphries has a new contract. Steve Keim and Michael Bidwill both have commented about things that are going on. And we're going to have consecutive shows. We got a show this week talking about DJ Humphries and that new deal. And then next week, the Combine begins, and we will have a special guest joining us. We'll talk about specifically the DJ Humphries deal, how it affects free agency, how we think it'll affect the draft, and then deal with some of the comments about David Johnson, his contract, and then the potential of a Patrick Peterson contract extension. Maybe it's a little more other than that. Let's go ahead and get started with this show. And Seth, when we heard the news, we got the contract, came out Monday night. It was leaked by his agent. I'm assuming it was his agent because of what was said in the report by Mike Garafolo of an NFL Network, citing the agent's names who got the deal done with the Cardinals, who represented David Johnson in his contract, and now DJ Humphries. 3-year contract extension worth $45 million, $30 million in total money in the first 2 years, and $29 million guaranteed. That was the deal was announced without the financials because the Cardinals don't disclose financials as part of a team policy. It was announced that they signed the extension. DJ met the media, and now we have it out there. He's signed for another 3 seasons. Now, when the deal came out, Seth, let's start first. What were your initial reactions to the timing, the length, and the money?
I thought it made sense. I mean, that's exactly where they wanted to be. We've talked about it a lot, since the offseason started. They wanted to be about, they wanted to be about $14 million a year. It was going to be really hard to be there because that was the contract of Riley Reif, I want to say 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And Reif's credentials are basically the same as that of Humphries, maybe just a little more stability in terms of health. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and then you look at kind of the contract history of Steve Keim and how he forms these contracts, you're probably looking at a cap hit of only about $10 million in year one, the full 15 in year 2, and then in year 3 you're going to have a $20 million cap hit that gives them $15 million, in cap space if they were to move on from Humphries, only $5 million in dead money, and then also reward Humphries pretty well if he stays healthy and continues to play well. I think in that case, it's a really big win for the Cardinals because, you look at it, it's 3 years. It's not too much. He'll be under 30 when he's up for his new contract. And it's basically a 2-year deal for $30 million with, 5 of that pushed out to year 3. So likely pushed out. We shouldn't say we know for sure, but just based on the history of what Keim has done. And so that makes sense. I mean, you get him at a discount in year 1 at about $10 million. So what is that, about a $800,000 raise from where he was last year? And so then in year 2, that's when you're going to see that $15 million for the first time. And then year 3, it's basically a carrot to DJ. Hey, you play well, you stay healthy, you're going to cash in. You're going to get $20 million in year 3. If not, the Cardinals get out of it, like I said, say $15 million, and DJ gets his $30 million and can go find another contract. So I think, honestly, for both teams, it works out well. The question becomes, just simply, can he stay healthy?
And for me, initially, when it kind of felt like, based on comments by both team president and chairman Michael Bidwell and general manager Steve Keim, that the franchise tag was kind of in play. And as I've mentioned, I don't know if I've said it on the air or just on Twitter or in some articles, the one thing that changes once you use the franchise tag is that when you tag him, and that's, that deal is for $16.1 million, that's then becomes your beginning conversation in terms of salary, because if you're willing to pay him, like if I'm DJ and you're willing to pay me $16.1 million this year, well, obviously, why would I agree to take less than that in a per year average? And are you going to ask me to do that and then take a pay cut? Those are the kind of logistics and the logic behind that. So the fact that, one, they didn't use the franchise tag was good. Two, if they were going to use the transition tag, they're talking $14.4 million. And I thought there were a couple of things that kind of played into it for those who didn't want to see the Cardinals pay too much, quote unquote, too much for Humphries. The fact that the last 2 big contracts to offensive linemen happened to go to right tackles and were for significant amounts of money. Trent Brown getting $16.5 million per year average, and then Lane Johnson. Now he's kind of an heir apparent to left tackle. His contract extension worth $18 million per year in terms of the average. I thought that was going to push the salary up to whether or not we wanted to, whether or not we thought that he was that good a player. That was going to be the market. It was going to be about $16 million. I know we've talked about on this show that we thought probably 4 years and $60 million is probably right around the right price. And so when I heard it was 3 years, I'm like, that's even better, because it's good for both parties, in my opinion. It pays him in that upper echelon. It's not top 5 money, but it's right there for solid tackle money, the 15 per year average. It's locks him up long for multiple years, so you have that left tackle position taken care of. They have a potential out, and if DJ plays well and plays all the way through the 3 years, guess what? He's going to be 29 years old and still can easily cash in again. That would be a financial boon for him overall. I mean, he could cash in another 3 to 4 year deal worth, probably by that time, left tackles are going to be making, even on the low, like the average tier will be nearing $20 million per year.
Right. And I mean, you look at it, Nate Solder, who was really good playing in front of, I guess, blocking for Tom Brady, got $16 million a year. And he's been not so good blocking in New York for 2 seasons. And he was, I think, 29 or 30 when he signed that contract. So, I mean, you hit it right on the head. Like, it's really the best case scenario for both teams, if the Cardinals were able to kind of backload the contract as we talked about. You really don't want to see them as eating 15 plus million this year in cap space. Because I know people say, it's only 5 million, but you're talking about, J.R. Sweezy type player, which means not just a starter, but like a, consistent starter.
Well, you could get a starting defensive lineman for that amount. That's what they paid Darius Philon a year ago. So
right, and so
$5 million goes a little ways.
Right, and so that'll be the key thing. I mean, obviously, down the line, the biggest thing will be health, but we'll see how that goes. And I mean, you look at it, Nate Solder with the Patriots, they let him go at 30, and that's what he signed at 30. So DJ will be a full year younger at 29 for his next contract. So you could potentially see, him get, if he stays healthy, I mean, you could see him cash in 4 years, 70 million in 3 years from now. And heck, I mean, that's one of those situations where if in 2 years he's played 32, let's just say 30 games, and the Cardinals are continuing to grow offensively, and you're seeing them become a, playoff team, not just a contender, but a playoff team. And, he'll have a lot of that, be involved in that a lot. You'll probably see after year 2 that they'll give him a 4 or 5 year extension at that point. So, like you said, it's a 2-year deal. Basically, it's a 3-year deal in name only. And it's a deal that basically gives them a really good chance to be players in free agency without having to, do too much in terms of forcing it on a veteran left tackle like an Andrew Whitworth or an Anthony Costanzo, who were going to get paid more at an older age. You know what I'm saying? So, and then, or or having to hope that Andrew Thomas, the left tackle from Georgia, isn't a guy that's going to struggle in pass pro, or hoping that, Gerald Wills or Tristan Wirfs can move over to the left side. Now all of a sudden you don't have to worry about any of that, and that's just a good thing, and it just frees you up in a number of ways.
And on another note, this is actually kind of it's an important thing as an organization as well. For one, this finally looks good for Steve Keim, because it means he, quote unquote, hit finally on a first-round pick. Humphries represents the very first of Keim's first-round draft picks to make it to a second contract. That's really kind of sad. As you look, Jonathan Cooper flamed out. They traded him after a couple of years. He was part of the deal to get Chandler Jones, but he was basically a throw-in. Then you go to Dan Buchanan. He was gone after his fifth-year option. Then you've got Humphries, who's got it. Kamdichi, he's already out. Hassan Reddick, probably. You can't imagine if he's even going to be on this team. He could get traded. They're not going to cut him, but he could end up in a deal somewhere. This is really, it's good for him. And if you look historically for the Cardinals have not had a legacy left tackle on their team since Louis Sharp. And for those of you who don't know who Louis Sharp is, he was the guy who was at the end of his career when the Cardinals moved from St. Louis to Arizona. He was a pretty dang good player at one point of his career, and after that they've had guys like Lomas Brown, but he was a rent a player. He was a veteran already who came towards the end of his career. They've had a couple of guys that they hoped would be good. Levi Brown was a starter for a while, but he didn't make it. I mean, he signed a second contract, but he was cut and then re-signed. And everyone, if you remember Levi Brown, all Cardinals fans wanted him out of town for years, only to realize that in 2012 when he tore his triceps and was no longer the left tackle, that it could actually get worse. But this is significant because it could potentially, and what we've seen, he went from an inactive rookie that first year in 2015 to a guy that played right tackle, then moved to left tackle and looked promising, only to have the concussion in the year. Then he had 2 years of knee injuries. He was on for that fifth-year option, and he did exactly what really everyone wanted him to do. He improved in his play, he improved in his maturity, he improved in his leadership, and he improved in his durability. And he didn't just play and start all 16 games. He missed a whopping 2 snaps all season. Now, I will say this, for those who are saying, oh, of course he did that on a contract year. When it comes to body and durability, guess what? That's not something you can push through on on your contract year. It's one thing to be motivated and play. It's another to have your body finally agree with yourself. It's not like he was being soft the previous 2 years. It was a knee issue that he had. And this year, it wasn't a case where he took lots of practice time off. He was an Iron Man this year. To miss only 2 snaps for the entire season, that was the sort of progress that you wanted to see. And so it gets him the contract that he needs. It gets him the contract that the Cardinals need. And it gives them increased flexibility across the offensive line in terms of what they want to do free agency and what they want to do in the draft. So, I mean, to me, there was zero downside to this at all. It was, and you know me, I'm always highly positive, but there was nothing. There are no downsides really to this deal because, one, injuries are going to happen, but you get him at a reasonable price. They believe that he's developing into one of the better tackles in the league. He's the devil that they know, because otherwise you know what he can do. You bring another tackle into the system, you don't know if things are going to translate. Like you just said, like Nate Solder going from New England to New York, not the same player. And that's, I mean, you look at the history. I actually went over it. And you look at the history of left tackle picks in the NFL. The last time a left tackle actually was the all rookie tackle. So they stopped designating and they just started saying tackles, 2 guards, and a center. And the last time a left tackle was oh goodness, I think it was 2016. If I remember correctly. So, I mean, it's not a common thing. It was Taylor Decker, and Taylor Decker's not even that good anymore. So, I mean, it's everybody wants to say, oh, they're the safest picks in the draft. But the reality is there's no such thing as safe. And unfortunately, with the college game the way it is, it's really hard to project left tackles in the NFL. One, because there's not a lot of need for them in pass pro. But 2, the other thing is when you watch how the college game is, a good left tackle. So, let's say a guy like Tristan Wirfs, who played right tackle, but, he only saw maybe 2 NFL caliber pass rushers all season. I mean, all season, not just in one game, like all season. And so that's the thing is when they get to the NFL, it's a huge change up for them and for what they have to do game in and game out, because now all of a sudden you've got to go up against, Nick Bosa. You've got to go up against a Dante Fowler or a Jadeveon Clowney or, these guys. Like all of a sudden that's who you're going up against. You're not going up against these guys that are selling car insurance or coaching high school ball or, or a PE teacher again. Like, it's just so different. And I think, it was like, I think your quote of the devil, is simply the easiest way to look at this. And that's why I wrote about that, a couple weeks ago or last week. The reality is average left tackles under 30, they get 14 plus million a year. That's what they get. I mean, Russell Okung got, 53 million over 4 years. Riley Reif got 60 million over 5. Jake Matthews got 72.5 million over 5 years. He had never been to a Pro Bowl before, and he got 5 years and 72.5 million. Donovan Smith is bad, and he got 3 years, 42 million. I mean, you're talking 14 plus million just because these guys can stand up at the left tackle position. And I'm not trying to, take away anything from them, but
everybody looks at the Tyron Smith contract and goes, well, he's only making X. It's like, well, he signed his contract like his second or third year into the league, and it's not even a legal contract anymore. Like, nobody can sign those deals because it's an 8-year deal. Because isn't there a 6-year maximum now on deals?
I think so.
And so, what Tyron Smith is getting paid is irrelevant to the conversation. You know, what guys like Joe Staley are getting paid is irrelevant to the conversation, because they're guys that, you know, they are older, plus 30, or their contracts were signed so long ago that it doesn't matter. So, I mean, that's just the way you have to look at it. I mean, this is literally the cost of doing business with league average under 30 left tackles in the NFL.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're gonna talk more about DJ Humphries' deal. Only this time is, how does it affect the Cardinals in free agency? That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We're back talking about DJ Humphries' deal still. Only now we look ahead as free agency comes around the bend next month. How does this affect things? The one thing we know is that if we're anticipating what's happening, their cap space is now going to drop another about $10 million. And now they've got the left side of they've got left tackle, left guard, and right guard secured for next season, with a little bit of this uncertainty at center and at right tackle. What do you see the Cardinals now doing in terms of free agency across the board, on the offensive line or anything else? How does this change things for the Cardinals?
I think the biggest thing it changes is that it allows them the flexibility that you mentioned last segment. You know, it allows them flexibility not only in free agency but the draft. All of a sudden, if you grade out Andrew Thomas as your best player, and I'm just throwing a left tackle name out there, you can take him. But all of a sudden, if he's your third best player and your two before him are CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy, you don't have to take Andrew Thomas. You can take the best player on your board, truly. And you look at that, that's a big deal, because we've seen the Cardinals tend to not do as well when they're looking at need. And so when you look at the needs of this team right now, they clearly have a ton of needs on defense. And that's why we've been talking quite a bit about being able to fix that with known talent in free agency, because you don't want to get into a situation where you go, man, they really need to get a front seven defensive player. And then, Derek Brown goes earlier, Javon Kinlaw or Isaiah Simmons, and then you're stuck with one of those other three guys that you may not have as graded as highly as Tristan Wirfs or, a Jeffrey Okudah if he somehow falls that far, or one of the wide receivers that we talked about. So you just want the flexibility to go with truly the best player at any position, because the only position right now that you would say is off the table in the first 3 rounds, probably 4, but definitely 3, would be quarterback. And so, because even a left tackle, even if you took a guy in round 3, like the kid out of Auburn, you could still take a left tackle in round 3, because like we talked about, that guy could play right tackle in year 2, and then if Humphries flops or God forbid gets hurt, then he slides in year 2 or 3. So it just gives you the flexibility that you want, that you should desire to have for your team moving forward. And in free agency, it does the same thing, because now all of a sudden you don't have this glaring hole at left tackle, right? Like you don't have to say, oh man, we gotta set aside 15 to 20 million to go get a left tackle, or worse, we have to downgrade the left tackle position because we were cheap.
Number one for me, it affects free agency, number one, simply because it frees up some money. It sounded like the plan all along was DJ Humphries was going to be back. He was going to be their left tackle in 2020, even if talks were not going in a positive direction. So they would have transitioned, tagged, or have franchise tagged, which would have cost them more against this year's cap. So that frees up money. On one sense, with paying DJ what you're doing, it would seem to preclude them from going after a big, costly right tackle and a name that's out there, been brought up multiple times by Johnny on your site, is that they are taking a hard look at Jack Conklin, the Tennessee Titans. He's not going to come cheaply, and he's probably going to cost at least as much as it's kind of, I think he's projected at, 15-16 million a year is kind of his market value. And on one sense, you look at the left tackle, like, can you really invest that much money on the offensive line? But maybe they think they can, and they're going to double down on the offensive line, shore up that right tackle position, which was not terrible, but wasn't good. I mean, Justin Murray did fine last year, but if Jack Conklin would really upgrade that, but bookending Humphries and Conklin on the ends as really pretty dang good run blockers would then set them up to be dominant in the running game once again. And you're kind of hearing the same thing in terms of Conklin, that he's still kind of on the table. Is that correct?
Yeah, it sounds like, that's still going to be an avenue they explore. The problem becomes, and this is just reality, is that they have to be conscious and understand that they have to, at some point, say this is too expensive for me. Because, as we said, it's at this point, to me, Conklin makes a ton of sense if you get him at the right price. The concern becomes you don't want to go get into a bidding war or pay him, in excess of DJ's per year average of $15 million, and then have to rely on all kind of young guys or real journeymen on the defensive side of the ball. And so that's kind of my biggest concern with their still infatuation of Conklin.
That is my personal thing, is like, you really think, well, I'm sure they're looking into it. At this point, the due diligence was happening because they didn't have DJ under contract yet. And so they don't want to close that door, especially if the opportunity arises. Now, in terms of building an offensive line, they now have two expensive positions at left tackle and left guard. Is Justin Pugh is a very well paid guard. Right guard is an okay, J.R. Sweezy is not making a ton of money, but he's not on the cheap. And that leaves two positions on the offensive line where you kind of have to go light on. The deal that I'm surprised has not been announced yet is that of AQ Shipley, which makes me think that maybe he's asking for more than the Cardinals want to pay. I'm thinking 2 years, $5 or $6 million is probably the right range. But if he's looking for, say, J.R. Sweezy money, about $4.5 to $5 million per year, then that might price him out of what the Cardinals want to do. And the truth is, they are at center in a good position. Of anywhere on the offensive line, they have a guy in Mason Cole that they already believe in. Cliff Kingsbury said on numerous occasions that Mason Cole was basically a starter. They would have been very comfortable with him starting at center. Shipley just had the experience. And so Mason Cole kind of paid his dues, kind of being the do-everything guy, and they were just getting him in the lineup at the end of the year just to make sure that he was playing. They wanted to reward him for that. So they are in the position where they could let Shipley go, finally replace him. Mason Cole becomes the starter, and they're still okay depth-wise because while it's not necessarily the same level as Mason Cole or that they believe, they already have a Lamont Gilliard they drafted last year who could develop, who can be that backup. Or they could even bring back Max Garcia, a guy that's familiar with the system. Sean Kugler knows him and has been a starter and can play the interior positions as well. And so you could let Shipley walk, and so you save a couple $3 million at the center position. And in another way to go, it's you could go lower price at right tackle instead of throwing all that money at Jack Conklin. It's not an attractive, it's not a sexy move, but Justin Murray was fine. He wasn't good. He wasn't bad. He was adequate at right tackle, and you've already got him under control. So he's going to make about $700,000 this next season. Marcus Gilbert's coming back from his torn ACL. You could sign him anywhere between, $1.5 to $3 million in incentive beyond that. He wants to be back, and between AQ Shipley coming back from that torn ACL, between what he's talked to Carson Palmer about coming back from the ACL, he's talked to a couple of people about that. He could come back, and even as a bench guy, if Justin Murray continues to improve, or if he improves rather than just stagnates, like we've seen other younger tackles do, you're in a position there that you don't have to invest a ton of money, and that way you then have money to potentially pay a Kenyon Drake. Because if you sign Jack Conklin, you're probably not paying Kenyon Drake, or you're not paying. You're basically losing money for one potential defensive starter in free agency on the other side. Well, if you go with a Marcus Gilbert / Justin Murray, maybe even add Jordan Mills back to the mix, you could go with the same trio of right tackles you went with a season ago, and then spend that money elsewhere. And that's bringing back Kenyon Drake, and then you've got money to throw on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you've got all of this, need that you still have to go forward with, and when you fill a hole, and it's something we talked about, not creating holes that aren't there already. So when I see people suggesting cutting J.R. Sweezy to save $4 million, I'm like, why? Like,
then you're gonna have to spend more than that to go get one.
Right, exactly. And you have a finite amount of capital, whether it's, cap space or whether it's draft picks, it's not like it's unlimited. So it's not like you have access to, just because Joe Thuney's available and is a great guard doesn't mean that you can get Joe Thuney. And that, I understand everybody wants to think the best of their team, and even you, as much as you like to look at things with rose-colored glasses on, you also understand the reality that you can't just will these things to happen. So
it's not fantasy football. You can't just draft these free agents here. You have suitors. And if you don't have suitors, then it's probably not a player you necessarily want to spend a lot of money on. Right,
exactly. So that was big because it took that need out of everything. So when you look at it from that perspective, I thought it was a big signing, and it creates a really kind of good air around the Cardinals going into free agency, because they're taking care of their business heading into free agency. Say what you want about last year and all of the negatives, but the off season went well last year too. They signed a Robert Alford. They grabbed, these type of guys in the offseason before they even became available. So I think they're continuing on in a strong, kind of pre-off season work, getting ready to go into free agency with a plan and try and execute it. That's the next part of this whole thing is, can they execute their plan in free agency?
Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Still talking about DJ Humphries. Seth's alluded to it a little bit. We're going to talk about how Humphries' deal now affects the draft. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. If there's two position groups, tackle has kind of been one of the most focused on positions for the draft, at least in mock drafts and draft talk, for the 8th overall pick the Cardinals have in the first round. And mock drafts, I mean, we've seen 4 or 5 different tackles projected for the Cardinals to take. Receiver has been common. There's a couple of defensive players. I even saw one from CBS Sports that I don't know how this happened, how it played out, but Ohio State cornerback Jeffrey Okudah made it all the way down to number 8, and I'm sure the Cardinals would run to the podium in that case, even though they don't have a drastic need for cornerback. When you can get it, you do that. Now, I'm going to point to some comments that Steve Keim made on the radio this last week about his draft philosophy. You have your draft grades and you just go straight by their board outside of quarterback. But then you also have to figure in that there's tiers and layers. So if you've got a few players that are graded nearly the same and you have a position of need, you take that position even though it might not be your top player on the board, but it's pretty close. Keim revealed, he says, you take it a step further. It isn't necessarily the position you need. It's positions that are difficult to acquire via free agency. He named specifically cornerbacks, left tackles, and quarterbacks. They've got their quarterback. You have to worry about that. So come the 8th pick overall, if you have 3 players, we'll say you've got a receiver, a defensive lineman, maybe a linebacker, and you've got a tackle, all graded in the same area. He made it sound that tackle would be the priority because they're more difficult to find. Caveat being, now the Cardinals have the 8th overall pick, and the truth is, nowadays, it's not just left tackles going high. Right tackles are even going high as well. They're easier to find. And so it sounds like if, say, an Andrew Thomas or, say, a Tristan Wirfs, they grade one of these players as able to play left tackle and grade them roughly in the same tier grade area as they would, say, a Javon Kinlaw, Derek Brown, or even the receiver CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, all those guys, that they could and would take a tackle. Now, the way things are set up right now, they could take a tackle. They could take a straight right tackle at number 8 if that's their highest grade player. They could take a right tackle they see can play left tackle. They could take a left tackle they could play right tackle for now. And then it still sets them up for the future. Because you get an Andrew Thomas, for example, who is a left tackle. You could swing him out there to right tackle for the first 2 to 3 years. And even if Humphries plays well, but you like what Thomas has to offer, you could still let Humphries go after those 3 years, move Thomas over to left tackle, and he gets to be your starting left tackle while there's still 2 years left on the rookie deal, his year 4, and then his 5th year option. And so it still offers a lot of flexibility. Now, you said, Seth, that you think that was a little bit of posturing. How do you see this affecting? I think that tackle no longer becomes a priority in round 1 or even round 2. But I don't think it's off the board.
No, I don't think it is. But I think when you look at the kind of way the NFL is going, there's the, creator preventer theory, and creator, being quarterback and wide receiver, and then preventer being cornerback and pass rusher. And so obviously the best pass rusher, in the draft is out of the question, and Chase Young. But on the other preventer sign, you kind of hit on it. Jeffrey Okudah, if he somehow fell to 8, well, it's not a need. It is such a bargain, and it's so, it's so hard to find true top end corners, a la, Stephon Gilmore, Jalen Ramsey, these guys, that it would be negligence to not take a guy like that. And then you get the ideas of wide receivers. And I've actually flipped on this since I started doing this, because I used to be very anti wide receiver early, but the way the NFL is now and how diverse you need to be as a wide receiver, guys that can do, win from multiple ways, a la Larry Fitzgerald when he was a little bit younger, are more important now than ever. And we kind of just saw that in the Super Bowl. I mean, you had a Tyreek Hill, you had a Mecole Hardman, you had a Travis Kelce. Those are the guys that were the big difference makers. And even in San Francisco, I mean, they've spent an exuberant amount of draft capital on day 2 in their wide receivers. I mean, they drafted Deebo Samuel and Jalen Hurd in rounds 2 and 3 this year. They drafted Dante Pettis last year. They signed Marquise Goodwin. Sorry, get those guys confused. And then they drafted another guy that's escaping me right now. And then they went and traded for Emmanuel Sanders because they were like, it's not enough. So that's the thing, is like a wide receiver that takes pressure off of everybody is starting to become, just as important as those fabled left tackles used to be. Because the reality is this, and we just saw it with DJ Humphries, unless there is a guy that is a true, like lockdown left tackle, it's really kind of they're all roughly the same. I mean, you have your Pro Bowlers, you have your top end guys, but in reality, you're going to get, roughly a similar performance from those next tier of guys. And then your bad players are still going to be bad. So, the question is, can you take the pressure off those average players and help your quarterback? So that'll be what's interesting to see, because I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be interesting to see if people are excited about drafting a right tackle in this draft. And then it'll be interesting to see if people would be upset about drafting what looks like a potentially lockdown corner in Okudah. Again, I don't think Okudah falls that far, but there's been weirder things that happen in the draft. And with all the talk of Tua being healthy and now the Justin Herbert love, I mean, we could potentially see 3 quarterbacks go in the first 4 picks plus Chase Young. And now all of a sudden it's kind of a free-for-all with, whoever doesn't get Jack Conklin. So you could be talking about, the Giants, the Dolphins, all those teams are in on Jack Conklin. The Panthers now desperately need a linebacker, but they also desperately need a defensive lineman. So where does the Okudah, train stop? I talked to a guy that I really trust that's a scout, and he just flat out told me that if you just take the quarterbacks off the board, the top 2 guys in the draft are Young and Okudah. And to me, that carries a lot of weight, because it kind of goes into what Keim was saying about those positions that are hard to find and then hard to get once they're in the NFL. And then it also goes to kind of the idea of, well, you just drafted a cornerback, you have Patrick Peterson, you just signed Robert Alford, but can you really ever have enough corners? I mean, that's something we've known for a long time.
Now, coming next from the Rise Up C Red podcast, we're best of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to move on from DJ Humphries in the draft. We're going to talk a little bit about comments made about David Johnson. What is there to talk about still with his deal? That's coming up next on Rise Up C Red. We're back on the Rise Up C Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Here we go now. David Johnson. Steve Keim was on the radio. He said absolutely, and this is now, I think this is a no-brainer. Cutting David Johnson is not an option. I think we all knew that. It would be irresponsible from a cap standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and from a football standpoint to outright cut him. Trading him is still tricky, and Steve Keim didn't. Now, naturally, there's a reason why he didn't do it, but he didn't close the door on the potential of having both Kenyon Drake and David Johnson on the football team together. How likely do you think that is?
I don't see a way it's possible. I really liked your article you wrote Saturday, Sunday, about how the Cardinals could kind of trade David Johnson and eat some of the salary cap, because there's no, it's not the NBA where you can take money, or send money with a player to compensate. So whoever trades for David Johnson's getting the whole shebang in terms of cap hit, unless the Cardinals do what you said, which is what Patrick Peterson was so upset about last year, and turn some of his salary into a roster bonus for, kind of fast forward that and then trade him. You and I talked about it before this show started, and I think that coupled with a draft pick, I mean, they gave up. They don't have a fifth now, right? Because they used on Jalen Thompson, and then it'll likely be a fifth to Miami, correct?
Correct. So as of right now, they don't have a fifth rounder at all, and they have a late sixth that's coming from the Corey Cunningham deal, because they traded their initial sixth. Wait a minute. Shouldn't they have another sixth? No, I think they might still have a sixth. I think they might have two sixths. I'm not exactly sure. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, and so basically then the hard part becomes, I think there's a, there's this inverse of, if you're willing to send a pick with David Johnson, you probably would have to take on less money in your scenario. So if you were to send a 6th-round pick, you'd probably have to send, like you said, probably convert about, what'd you say, about $6 million of that, or $10 million of that?
Well, he's due 10. I suggest
convert
4.
6. Okay.
So you pay 4, because how it works right now, the $4 million, turning $4 million into bonus would make his, after trading him, would leave $10 million in dead money, but still $4 million in savings, which would still make, like, saving $4 million still makes it palatable to, in my opinion, if you're not getting more than $4 million in cap savings, you might as well just have him on the roster, because maybe he plays better, maybe he could contribute something, or he's really good insurance if there's an injury to Drake or whoever.
Right. And so the idea that you would do that, I think if you traded David Johnson with this scenario, you're probably going to have to send a pick too to really entice the team, if you're going to create enough space to sign Kenyon Drake. So, and then the opposite would be true. If you don't sign Kenyon Drake, if you retain David Johnson, I don't see how you don't draft a running back at least. I mean, I don't know if you can justify signing another running back unless it's a complete flyer on a guy, like a kind of like what the 49ers did with the guy Raheem Mostert that ended up being their lead back this year, but he'd been with them for 3 years type thing, like where just flukes and works out. I don't think you can go and sign even a $4 or $5 million a year guy if David Johnson's still on the roster, right?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough in that scenario.
Because I mean, the whole thing is he's owed what, $16 million technically. Is that what the number is?
It is. Let's see. It's 14. Well, he's owed 10.2. His cap hit is 14. But if they cut him because of the dead money, they'd be on the hook for the full 10.2 in salary plus the 6 in dead money. So it becomes 16 million dead. So they lose 10 million. So it cost them $2 million more in cap space to cut him than to just keep him.
Right. So in essence, you can't sign a running back because you can't have committed basically $20 million in cap this year. I mean, I know it's a little less, but that's why you can't sign Drake to the $6 million-ish that he's expecting to get. I mean, it's just not something you can do.
My writer, Chuck Harris, he runs a Cardinals Cardinals page for Facebook as well. He actually wrote a scenario in which that you could have both Johnson and Kenyon on the roster at the same time. It's going to come down to Kenyon's price. While I wrote that probably the deal that would get it done is 4-year, $25 million, where you're looking at $6.5-ish million per year for Drake. Using a couple of comps, like if you take Jerick McKinnon's out of the picture because that was a bad contract, and you look at Dion Lewis's contract in Tennessee, which kind of turned out to be a bad contract as well, you then start to getting down to more the $4.5 million range, kind of the Tevin Coleman with the 49ers a year ago. You look at Carlos Hyde, 1 year, $2.8 million, but probably more than that. If you go this route and you pay him 3 years and $16.5 million, the way you structure it is, say you give him, I can't remember what the structure is. You give him X amount, like $8 million up front or something like that, and then your cap hit in year one comes to about $3 or $4 million, and that is much more palatable. You could have him and David Johnson and Chase Edmonds on the roster at the same time. David Johnson's contract is only guaranteed $2.1 million and only for injury for 2021, which means you could move on from him and you could then take the next year little bit of a balloon in Kenyon's salary in 2021. That's a scenario I could see it playing out. But the more I think about it, the more things happen and there's no report of any agreed trade, is that they might end up having just David Johnson on the roster. And the good thing is, even though we know he wasn't happy, there's some things that haven't changed. He's still a good guy. He's still a good teammate. He still works hard in practice. So he wasn't sloughing off. So kind of what I suggested might have been between the lines is maybe he wasn't practicing as hard. Steve Keim came out, he's still working hard. It wasn't because he wasn't working hard. And he's still going to do good work off the field. So it's not like, even though you have a dissatisfied David Johnson, he's not going to become a problem in the locker room. Especially considering he isn't, despite the stature he has on the team, the production the last 2 years, especially if Kenyon is, if they re-sign Kenyon and they keep David Johnson on the roster, I don't think there's going to be a problem in the locker room because Kenyon will have that cachet of respect in the locker room that the teammates know that he should be playing. And David Johnson's not going to be a problem. He's not going to be satisfied, but he's not going to become a problem.
No, I don't think so. I just, it'll be interesting, what they do in terms of carries. I'm always wary of guys that haven't proven over the long haul that they are, kind of bell cows in the NFL. You hit on two, Jerick McKinnon, Dion Lewis, who had, similar kind of runs as Drake, and then they were expected to kind of be the guys, and that didn't work out. It's actually something that happens quite a bit. And then the other thing,
point out, the one saving grace that Kenyon has for him is the track record of the Dolphins, of the players going elsewhere and performing even better. So you get Jarvis Landry, who is just this glorified slot receiver, just volume catcher. He's pretty good. Ryan Tannehill, what the heck? You get these players leaving and playing better. You wonder what was going on, because Drake had a couple opportunities and he performed well as a starter, but they never felt he was more than a complimentary back. The Cardinals think he is capable of being a number one back, and I think all that's left now is will he be durable, because he's never had that workload. Now, granted, at age 26, one of the comments is he hasn't had the wear and tear. The question is, well,
can he hold up the whole time?
Can he hold up, especially since coming out of the draft? One of the little knocks on him was, does he have the frame to hold up? I think more as more running backs have entered the league with different builds, that's kind of been a little bit proven wrong, that you can be a thinner, though his size and weight don't say he's slight. It's just his look is slighter than other backs.
Well, and that's the other thing, is you want to be careful with the fact that the running back position seems to be one that is more easily filled than others, and so they've it's one of those fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me type things, where if you commit money to another running back and then Chase Edmonds is kind of your lead guy next year, like, no matter how much good you do at that point, it's gonna be like, man, does this guy really know what he's doing? So, I mean, that's the other kind of thing that do you want to get yourself in, especially, I mean, this is one of the best running back classes I can remember. I will say this, though, when you look at it, I think that either they're going to re-sign Drake or they're going to draft a guy. I don't see any way that they go in with DJ, Chase Edmonds, and then, kind of lower end free agent as their running back room in 2020. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
No, I feel the same way. The more and more I think, it's like, obviously it's going to go one of three ways. They're going to re-sign Drake and trade DJ. I don't know how that's going to happen.
That's a hard one to figure out.
DJ and Drake feels like more a possibility, or DJ and draft pick. That and not. I'm not talking like where they drafted Chase Edmonds. And I know some people's like, oh, just do late, 5th, 6th. I'm like, well, one, they don't have a 5th round pick. Their 6th round pick is at the bottom of the round because it's a Patriots pick. So you're going rounds 1, 2, 3, 4. There's some good names out there between, the Pro Football Focus has them taking DeAndre Swift. That's solid. I've seen J.K. Dobbins. That'd be fantastic. Clyde Edwards-Helaire would be a really good fit. Heck, Benjamin from Arizona State provides a lot of kind of the same type of things there. So there's some really talented running backs that aren't. Maybe it's because of what's happening, this quote-unquote devaluation of running backs again. But there's some talent out there that could do the things that Drake does and potentially less. But I don't know. That the running back position is a really interesting thing, and until there's an actual deal in place, especially with Devontae Freeman getting cut, the report that the Rams are trying to deal Todd Gurley, it's gonna make it really hard to deal David Johnson, 1, and 2. Yeah, I think it softens up the market a little bit for Drake, which is kind of good for the Cardinals.
Right, and that's the other thing, is that you could get him a little bit cheaper, or maybe even on a 1-year deal type thing, where you just bring him back for 1 season and then that's it. And that's the other thing is the running back is a position, and I've talked about this before, where you look at it and you say, is this really where I want to spend my capital? And I'm starting to get that idea with running back and wide receiver personally. Like, these are positions that you can kind of chew up and spit out on a year-to-year basis, and then the pairs you play are those guys that are developed in the NFL in terms of offensive and defensive line, just because we've seen how hard it can be to find offensive and defensive linemen. I mean, in the draft, and develop them and kind of turn them into talented players. And so, yeah, sometimes you're overpaying, but at the same time, you're getting a known commodity. And as long as fluky things don't happen, like strip club, gun holdups, and back injuries and things like that, like, usually it works out okay.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. And for our final segment, Patrick Peterson and a contract extension. Could it be coming? That's coming next on Rise of Sea Red. Back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. And Patrick Peterson, not asking for a trade, not suspended. Well, let's hope not. Steve Keim says that they've opened up contract talks, something that I've said now for a year. It's coming. They weren't going to trade him. In many ways, I felt that initial trade request was sort of wanting a contract extension. Now, there have begun to be some talks to try and extend his contract. He's got 1 year left on his deal, and both Michael Bidwell and Steve Keim would like to see Patrick retire a Cardinal. Now, what should we think of that? I've felt it's coming. I thought that was going to be one of the things that happens this offseason. The question is, what's an extension going to look like for him?
We were just talking about it earlier, because you and I were talking about the Cardinals' kind of window, off the air, obviously, but the Cardinals' window with Kyler Murray and the kind of things that they can do. And one of those things that we're hoping that they do is get aggressive in terms of going after guys, established stars, kind of like we just talked about, that may be available. So I was talking about Darius Slay, and we were talking back and forth, and it was like, I wonder what Darius Slay's contract situation is like. And then we looked at it and we're like, oh my, he's 29, so he's the same age as Patrick, but he's only been in the league 6 seasons. So what is that, 2 less than Patrick? And so he's up next year. So they're going to be about the same. They're going to be in the same spot in the same age. And his projected contract, if he was to get traded and re-sign, was about $15 million a year. So about 4 years, $57 million. So I mean, I can't imagine that Patrick's going to get anything less than that, right?
No, I mean, he got the 5-year and $70 million extension. He's still among the top players, and I bet he's not going to want to really take a pay cut. So if I'm just throwing numbers out there, I'm thinking 4 years, $65 million. That would take him through his maybe 3. Maybe I do 3 years and 3 and 50. 3 and 50 with and you work it so that you throw at him $25 million up front in a signing bonus. That way he gets that money up front, and you guarantee some for this year, next year. But because he's set right now at $12 million in salary, you will say $24 million in signing bonus. That way you can take that cap hit. You're going to take a $6 million hit for the prorated salary for the signing bonus, and then you can say, since you paid him $24 million up front, have this year's salary be about $5 million or even $3 or $4 million, and then you actually shave off a couple of million off what was going to be the cap hit this year before things hit for 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, and I think the contract to watch, I mean, obviously they probably want to get it done before free agency so they free up that money. But the contract to watch, if it doesn't happen, is Chris Harris, who is a couple years older than Patrick at 31. And, he's projected right now to get about $12 million a year.
That sounds about right.
And so when you're looking at, him getting 32 over 3, and again, he's 2 years older. I mean, 3 might be what the Cardinals want to offer, but I would guess that he's probably going to want 5, and they probably meet in the middle at 4 and 60 to 65. So right around that $15 million a year range.
But the truth is that last year, that fourth year,
right,
doesn't have to be a real year. That could be an out year.
Yeah, it's like we said. I mean, in the NFL, 90% of the time, contracts are a year shorter than what they actually are. So, I mean, if you're doing a 4-year deal, it's really a 3-year deal. If you're doing a 3-year deal, like we talked about with DJ to start the show, it's really just a 2-year deal. So, so if you did 4 years and $60 million and guaranteed probably, what would you say, 40 of that, 42 of that, you probably, can have that last year at about 22 million with, probably only 5 to 7 in dead money.
Yeah, that would work. Now the question is, should they? Do you trust Patrick Peterson to play at a high level, to remain that number one or very good cornerback through the rest of his career? That's the next question, because if you're saying you want him to retire a Cardinal, you are locking him into age 34-ish, and you're going to be paying him like a top corner. Do you think he continued to be that up through the rest of his contract?
I mean, I don't think you have a choice unless you're very confident. I guess you could look at it this way: is if you're not in on a Byron Jones who's going to get, about 5 years, $70 million. And if you're not in on an older guy like a Chris Harris, then if you're going to wait and see if Okudah falls, that's a dangerous game to play, because you're going to need the cap space and cap relief that an Peterson extension will provide. Like you said, I don't think there's any reality to, or any chance that they trade him. So you're either going to let him walk knowing that you're going to just take a hopeful 3rd round comp next year, or you're going to, actually it wouldn't be until the next year, or you're going to re-sign him. And I mean, so that's the thing, is you have to make a decision early. I don't think you can let this play out. I have my opinions, and my opinion is that the Cardinals, and I wrote about this the other day, they lean too much on the nostalgia of legacy players because they don't have the winning tradition. And so their legacy players are built on things like longevity, and look at all these Pro Bowls that they went to under with the Arizona Cardinals, and instead they get caught kind of continuing to pay these guys maybe past their useful date, because they want to be able to say, hey, this Hall of Famer, because Peterson is going to go to the Hall of Fame. This Hall of Famer was an Arizona Cardinal for his entire career. Where you look at other teams that maybe operate at a more successful rate, obviously the Patriots are who jump out immediately, but they rarely hang on to guys too long, and instead, even the Seahawks let go of their guys, Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, guys that are Hall of Famers, Hall of Fame locks that have had a ton of success. And so, that's where I struggle, is that instead of looking for the next guy and maybe getting a younger guy cheaper or a younger guy at the same price, we just mentioned Byron Jones. He's 25 and he's going to get paid probably the same yearly as what a Peterson extension will be. And he's 4 or 5 years younger than Patrick. So that's the type of guy you want to pay 15, 16 million a year to. It's not that Patrick hasn't earned it. He completely has. He's one of the best cornerbacks, of the past 20 years. But your question is he going to be useful for that length of that contract, or be worth the contract during its entirety? And if we're talking a 4-year deal where they're really not out until the 4th year, I would venture to say no.
And there was a time earlier in his career when you thought maybe you could move him to safety. The way he's played, the lack of physicality in his game the last couple of years leads me to believe he probably won't translate well to safety. So we're going to have to look at, can he maintain the technique and athleticism and not have another PED issue, and 2, not have a stretch like he had when he came back from the suspension, because that would be a bad look overall, and you'd end up having a not so great ending, kind of how things went with Tyrann Mathieu in the end. But in the end, I think it's coming. Fans might not love it, but if he plays, like if what he did the end of the season is what we see moving forward, I think we will be able to move past the trade request and the suspension as long as we don't have any more hiccups after that, and that his legacy can then remain intact or be reset as a legacy Cardinal, as one of the greatest players of his generation and of the Cardinals in their team history. And to be honest, for him to be a Hall of Famer too, I think they need to. The greatest cornerbacks, they've also won rings, and so if he's going to achieve what he wants to achieve, it'll be good for the Cardinals to do what they need to do, and ideally, the building blocks are in place, and they get on the right trajectory, and Kyler is everything they want, and then everyone's happy, and then it doesn't matter anymore, and then there's also some lingering hate for Steve Keim, but hey, he rebuilt the team back up, and so they'll be angry that he's still around and proved them wrong and all that, but hey, that's that. And we'll wrap up this edition of the Rise of the C-Red podcast. This is episode 258. We will be back next week talking about the NFL Combine, as they will be beginning the weigh-ins and everything else, and we will have a guest on. It'll be a 3-way next week. We will have extensive draft talk, combine talk, and I will probably talk a little bit less because this is more up Seth and Justin's expertise starting next week. So with that, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Rue. This is the Rise of C-Red podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, Rise up, Sea Red.